The knife was already in her hand before Lyra Ashford realized she had picked it up. She stood behind the curtain of the grand hall, listening to the laughter on the other side, and her fingers pressed white against the handle of a blade she had no plan to use tonight. Not yet. Tonight was not for blood. Tonight was for watching the man who had destroyed her family stand at the height of his power, smiling, while the world called him a hero. Alpha King Cade Blackwood stood at the center of the hall, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black and silver, his dark eyes scanning the crowd like a wolf checking his territory. People bowed as he passed. Women admired him. Men feared him. And Lyra hated him with a fire that had never once cooled in the 8 years since he tore her family apart. She remembered the night clearly, the way memory sometimes burns itself so deep it never fades. She had been 16, hiding behind her mother's skirts while her father knelt before Cade's father, offering loyalty, offering everything, believing an alliance between their packs would protect them both. Cade had been there too, younger then, but already cold, already calculating. When his father died and Cade rose to power, he did not honor the alliance. He used it. He took her father's land, his warriors, his standing, and when her father dared to protest, Cade branded him a traitor and exiled him with nothing but the clothes on his back. Lyra's mother did not survive the winter that followed. Grief and cold took her slowly. In a small cabin far from the packlands where she had once been respected, Lyra remembered holding her mother's hand as it grew cold, and in that moment, something inside her hardened into a promise. She would make Cade Blackwood pay. She did not know how. She did not know when. But she knew it as surely as she knew her own name. Tonight, standing behind the curtain with a knife she would not use, she reminded herself that patience was a weapon too. She slid the blade back into her sleeve and stepped out into the light, becoming once again the composed, quiet woman that the world believed her to be. Nobody in that hall knew her real name. Nobody knew she was the daughter of the pack Cade had crushed. She had built a new identity from nothing, brick by brick, until she became someone useful enough to be invited into rooms like this one. She moved through the crowd, greeting nobles and warriors with practiced grace, gathering information the way a spider gathers threads. She heard whispers of unrest along the northern border. She heard that Cade's most dangerous rival, a pack leader named Damian Cross, had grown bold enough to challenge Cade's claims over disputed hunting grounds. She heard that Damian was searching for a wife, someone clever enough to help him manage the delicate politics of his rise. Lyra's mind sharpened at the mention of his name. She had heard of Damian Cross before, a man who had built his pack from almost nothing after his own family fell from favor years ago. He was young, ambitious, and hungry for power, but more importantly, he was Cade's enemy. If she could get close to him, she might finally have the opening she had waited 8 years for. She found an excuse to slip away from the gathering early, her mind racing with the beginnings of a plan. As she walked down the stone corridor toward the exit, a shadow stepped into her path. It was Cade. Her heart slammed against her ribs, though her face remained perfectly still. Up close, he was even more imposing than she remembered, his presence filling the narrow hallway like a physical weight. "I don't believe we've met," he said, his voice low and even. "You've been watching me all evening." "I watch everyone," Lyra replied smoothly. "It's a habit." His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. For a moment, something flickered in his gaze, something she could not name, something that made her breath catch despite herself. She hated that reaction. She buried it instantly beneath years of practiced control. "What's your name?" he asked. "Does it matter?" she said, offering a small, unreadable smile before stepping around him and continuing down the hall. She could feel his eyes on her back the entire way, and it took every ounce of her discipline not to look behind her. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, and she breathed it in deeply, trying to steady the strange thrum in her chest. She told herself it was nothing. Adrenaline, the thrill of standing close to her enemy without being recognized, that was all it could be. She traveled through the night to the outskirts of Damian Cross's territory, her mind already constructing the story she would tell him, the version of herself she would present. By the time the sun rose over the hills the next morning, she had made her decision. She would find a way into Damian's life, and through him, into Cade's downfall. The following days passed in careful preparation. Lyra studied everything she could learn about Damien Cross, his history, his allies, his weaknesses, his ambitions. She learned that his pack, though young, was fiercely loyal to him, and that he had earned that loyalty through fairness rather than fear, a rare trait among pack leaders. She learned that he had lost his parents young, much like she had lost hers, though the circumstances were different. He had clawed his way up from nothing, and now he stood as the only pack leader with enough strength and cunning to challenge Cade Blackwood directly. She also learned that he was searching for a wife, not out of love, but out of strategy. A marriage would strengthen his political standing and provide him with a partner capable of navigating the treacherous world of pack politics. It was, she realized, the perfect opportunity. On a cool afternoon, Lyra arrived at the gates of Damien's territory, dressed simply but elegantly, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in rooms of power. She requested an audience, and after a tense hour of waiting, she was finally led into a modest but well-kept hall where Damien Cross sat waiting. He was younger than she expected, though his eyes carried the weight of someone who had already lived through more than his years suggested. His dark hair was cut short, his jaw sharp, his gaze assessing her the moment she entered the room, much the way a merchant might assess the value of goods before agreeing to a trade. "You requested this meeting," he said, his tone neither warm nor cold. "I'm told you have a proposal." "I do," Lyra said, standing tall despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "I know you're looking for a wife, someone who can help you manage your rise to power. I believe I can be that person." Damien studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Bold," he said finally. "Most people don't walk into my hall and offer themselves as a bride within the first minute of conversation." "I'm not most people," Lyra replied. "And I'm not offering myself, I'm offering an alliance. You need someone sharp enough to help you navigate the politics surrounding your pack's rise. I need protection and position. It benefits us both." "And what do you get out of it exactly?" Damien asked, leaning back in his chair. "A title? Wealth? Safety?" Lyra hesitated only a fraction of a second before answering. "All of that, and the chance to see certain wrongs corrected." Something flickered behind Damien's eyes at that, a flash of understanding that surprised her. "You have a grudge," he said quietly, "against someone powerful." Lyra said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Damien studied her for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted into something that was not quite a smile. "I like people who are honest about their ambitions," he said. "Most people who come to me pretend to want peace and cooperation, when really, they want the same thing everyone else wants: power. At least you're not pretending." "Does that mean you accept?" Lyra asked, keeping her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "It means I'm considering it," Damien said. "Marriage is not something I take lightly, even one built on strategy rather than affection. I'll need time to think. And I'll need to know more about you before I agree to anything." Lyra nodded, understanding the caution in his voice. She had expected resistance, not immediate agreement, and she respected him more for it. "Take whatever time you need," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." As she left his hall that evening, walking beneath a sky heavy with clouds, Lyra allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction. The first step of her plan was in motion. Soon, she would be close enough to strike at the heart of Cade Blackwood's power, and this time, he would not see her coming. But as she walked, an unwelcome thought crept into her mind, a memory of dark eyes locking onto hers in a narrow stone corridor, and the strange, unexplainable warmth that had spread through her chest in that single moment. She pushed the thought away forcefully, reminding herself that there was no room in her plan for anything other than revenge. Whatever that flicker of feeling had been, she told herself, it meant nothing. It could mean nothing. She had a promise to keep, made over her mother's cold hand years ago, and she would not let anything, not even her own confused heart, stand in the way of fulfilling it. 3 days later, a messenger arrived at the small inn where Lyra had been staying, carrying a folded letter sealed with Damien Cross's mark. Her hands were steady as she opened it, though her pulse quickened with anticipation. The letter was short and direct, exactly as she expected from a man like him. He had agreed to meet with her again, this time to discuss the terms of their arrangement in greater detail. Lyra allowed herself a small, satisfied breath before folding the letter and tucking it away. The plan was moving forward, and somewhere in the capital, unaware of the storm quietly gathering against him, Cade Blackwood continued to rule his kingdom, blind to the fact that the woman who would soon become his greatest threat had already set her trap in motion. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, picturing her mother's face, and made a silent vow that she would see this through to the end, no matter what obstacles stood in her path, no matter what unexpected feelings tried to complicate her resolve. She had waited 8 years for this chance. She would not let it slip away now. The wedding took place on a gray morning, beneath a sky that could not decide whether to rain or clear. Lyra stood in a simple pale dress, far from the extravagant gowns other brides wore, and watched Damien Cross approach the altar with the same calm, calculating expression he wore during every negotiation. This was not a wedding built on love. Both of them knew it. Both of them had agreed to it with open eyes. The pack elders who officiated the ceremony spoke of loyalty and partnership, words that felt strange to Lyra's ears, given the truth behind her presence there. She repeated her vows in a clear, steady voice, promising to stand beside Damien in all matters concerning his pack, and he repeated his in kind, his gaze meeting hers with an unreadable calm that gave nothing away. When the ceremony ended, a small gathering of Damien's most trusted warriors and advisors celebrated with quiet toasts and careful smiles. There was no music, no dancing, no joy in the traditional sense. It was a transaction, dressed in the appearance of celebration, and everyone in the room seemed to understand that. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the halls had quieted, Damien found Lyra, standing alone on a balcony, overlooking his territory. The hills stretched into darkness beyond the torchlight, and the cold wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. "You did well today," Damien said, coming to stand beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Most people would have shown some nerves. You showed none." "I've had a lot of practice hiding what I feel," Lyra replied honestly. Damien studied her profile for a long moment. "I imagine you have," he said. "Whatever grudge drives you, I won't pretend to understand it fully, but I respect it, and I meant what I said before. As long as your goals don't threaten my pack, I won't stand in your way." Lyra turned to look at him fully, surprised by the directness of his words. "Why help me at all?" she asked. "You barely know me." Damien's expression grew distant, his eyes fixed on the dark hills beyond the balcony. "Because I understand what it feels like to lose everything to someone who claims to act with honor while destroying you from within," he said quietly. "My own family suffered under Cade Blackwood's rule, though the details are different from yours. I built this pack from nothing, because no one else would help me. I understand the weight of carrying that kind of anger." Lyra absorbed his words carefully, sensing there was more beneath the surface of his explanation, secrets he was not yet ready to share. She did not press him. She had her own secrets after all, and she understood the value of holding them close. "Then we understand each other," she said simply. Damien nodded, something like respect passing between them in the quiet night air. "We do," he agreed. "Whatever happens between us, I hope it can at least be built on honesty, rather than illusions." Over the following weeks, Lyra settled into her new role within Damien's pack, learning the rhythms of his territory, meeting the warriors and advisors who supported him, and slowly building a network of trusted contacts who could help her gather information about Cade's kingdom. She sent coded letters to old allies from her father's exiled pack, carefully rebuilding connections she had let go cold over the years. Damien, for his part, treated her with a fair and steady respect that surprised her. He consulted her on matters of strategy, valued her opinions during meetings with his advisors, and never once tried to overstep the boundaries of their arrangement. There were moments, quiet and unexpected, when Lyra caught herself appreciating his company more than she intended to. Moments when his dry humor, or careful patience, made her forget, briefly, the true purpose behind their marriage. She reminded herself often that this was business, nothing more. Her heart, if it strayed toward anything resembling affection, was not part of the plan. One evening, while reviewing reports from her network of contacts, Lyra came across information that made her blood run cold. Cade Blackwood was planning to attend a treaty gathering between the northern packs, a rare event that brought together leaders from across the region to negotiate boundaries and alliances. Damien, as one of the most powerful rising pack leaders, had already received an invitation. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. A chance to stand in the same room as Cade again, this time with the protection and status of Damien's name behind her. When she brought the information to Damien, he studied the invitation carefully, his expression thoughtful. "This gathering is important," he said. "It would strengthen my position significantly to attend, and it would be wise for you to accompany me. It will also put you in close proximity to the man you seem determined to bring down." "You noticed," Lyra said, not bothering to deny it. "I notice most things," Damien replied evenly. "I won't ask what you intend to do once you're there, but I'll ask you to be careful. Cade Blackwood is not a man who forgives easily, and if he discovers your identity before you're ready, the consequences could be severe." "I've waited 8 years," Lyra said quietly. "I know how to be patient." Damien studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "Then we'll attend together," he said finally, "and we'll see what unfolds." As the day of the gathering approached, Lyra found herself unable to shake a strange restlessness that settled deep in her chest. She told herself it was anticipation, the natural tension of standing on the edge of a plan, years in the making. But some quiet part of her, one she refused to examine too closely, wondered if it was something else entirely, some instinct warning her that the coming days would change everything she thought she understood about her own heart. She packed her belongings carefully, preparing for the journey north, and tried not to think about the last time she had stood close enough to Cade Blackwood to feel the strange, unexplainable pull that had unsettled her in that stone corridor. She told herself firmly that whatever she had felt that night meant nothing. She would soon discover how wrong she was. The northern gathering grounds sat in a wide valley, surrounded by tall pine forests, the air crisp with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Tents and pavilions in the colors of a dozen different packs dotted the landscape, and warriors from rival territories walked past one another with careful, watchful eyes, the tension of old rivalries simmering just beneath the surface of polite conversation. Lyra rode beside Damien, at the head of his small procession, her posture straight and composed, despite the knot of nerves tightening in her stomach. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, rehearsing her calm expression, steadying her breathing, reminding herself of every reason she had for being here. Still, as the grounds came into view and she caught sight of the black and silver banners marking Cade Blackwood's encampment, her heart began to pound harder than she wanted to admit. "Stay close to me during the formal proceedings," Damien said quietly as they dismounted. "There will be plenty of opportunities to gather information without drawing attention to yourself. Patience, remember." "I remember," Lyra said, though her eyes remained fixed on the distant banners. The opening ceremony began that afternoon, a formal gathering where pack leaders greeted one another beneath a large open pavilion, exchanging careful words of diplomacy while their advisors watched every gesture for hidden meaning. Lyra stood a respectful step behind Damien, observing the room with practiced discretion, cataloging faces, alliances, and tensions. Then Cade Blackwood entered the pavilion, and the entire room seemed to shift its attention toward him, the way a forest quiets when a predator passes through. He wore dark formal robes trimmed with silver, his presence commanding without effort. Lyra felt her pulse quicken, an old, familiar hatred rising in her chest, as she watched him greet the other leaders with practiced charm. When his gaze swept across the room and landed on her, recognition flickered across his features, though not the recognition she feared. He remembered her from the corridor weeks ago, she realized, though he clearly did not know who she truly was. He crossed the room toward Damien and Lyra with measured steps, his expression carefully neutral. "Cross," he said, addressing Damien with a formal nod. "I wasn't aware you'd taken a wife." "Recently," Damien replied evenly. "This is Lyra." Cade's dark eyes shifted to her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle uncomfortably. "We've met before," he said, briefly. "Have we?" Lyra replied, keeping her voice light and unconcerned, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "At the winter gathering," Cade said. "You didn't offer your name then either." "I suppose I value my privacy," Lyra said smoothly. A faint, almost curious smile touched the corner of Cade's mouth, and something in his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than politeness required. Lyra forced herself to hold his stare without flinching, refusing to let him see even a hint of the storm raging beneath her calm exterior. "Interesting," Cade said finally, before turning his attention back to Damien, the two men falling into a tense but civil exchange about territory boundaries and trade agreements. Lyra used the opportunity to study Cade more closely than she had allowed herself before, searching for any trace of the cruelty she remembered from her childhood. She found only calm authority, an unreadable composure that made it impossible to guess what truly lay beneath. It infuriated her. She wanted to see the monster she remembered, not this measured, controlled leader who commanded respect from everyone around him. As the formal proceedings continued through the afternoon, Lyra excused herself and wandered through the encampment, using the opportunity to gather information from unguarded conversations among warriors and servants from various packs. She learned of growing unrest along Cade's northern borders, whispers of dissatisfaction among some of his own advisors, small cracks in the foundation of his rule that she carefully noted for later use. As evening fell, a large feast was held beneath the open sky, long tables arranged around roaring fires, and pack leaders mingling with a formality that gradually loosened as food and drink flowed freely. Lyra sat beside Damien, observing the room, when she noticed Cade watching her from across the fire, his expression thoughtful and unreadable. Unable to bear the weight of his stare any longer, she rose from her seat and walked toward the edge of the gathering, seeking a moment of quiet beneath the tree line. The cool night air was a relief against her heated skin, and she closed her eyes, trying to steady the strange rhythm of her heartbeat. "You left rather abruptly," a familiar voice said behind her. She turned to find Cade standing a short distance away, his expression curious rather than accusing. "I needed air," she said simply. "You seem tense," he observed, stepping closer, though he kept a respectful distance between them. "Is something troubling you?" "Nothing that concerns you," Lyra replied, her tone sharper than she intended. Cade's brow lifted slightly at the edge in her voice, but rather than retreating, he studied her with renewed interest. "You dislike me," he said plainly. "I can sense it. I'd like to understand why." Lyra's heart pounded as old anger surged through her chest, threatening to spill out in words she was not ready to speak. She forced it down, burying it beneath years of practiced control. "You don't know me well enough to earn either my like or dislike," she said carefully. "Perhaps not," Cade said, "but something about you feels familiar, and I can't quite place it." Lyra's breath caught, panic flickering briefly, before she smoothed it away. "I have one of those faces," she said, forcing a light, dismissive tone. Cade studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his dark eyes. "Perhaps," he said finally, though his tone suggested he was not entirely convinced. Before either of them could say more, Damien appeared at the edge of the clearing, his eyes moving between Lyra and Cade with quiet assessment. "There you are," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable note of protectiveness. "The council is about to resume. They're asking for us." Cade nodded politely to Damien before turning to leave, though not before offering Lyra one final glance, his expression thoughtful in a way that unsettled her far more than she wanted to admit. As they walked back toward the gathering, Damien leaned close and spoke quietly. "Be careful around him," he said. "He's sharper than he lets on. If he suspects who you truly are, it could put everything we've built at risk." "I know," Lyra said, though her mind was still tangled in the strange, unwelcome pull she had felt standing close to Cade beneath the trees. That night, lying awake in her tent, Lyra stared up at the canvas ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. She told herself the unsettled feeling in her chest was nothing more than anxiety, the natural tension of standing so close to the man she had sworn to destroy. But some quiet, honest part of her recognized the lie even as she told it to herself. Whatever strange connection was forming between them, she promised herself she would not let it interfere with her purpose. She had not endured 8 years of grief and patience to be undone by a feeling she did not understand. Still, as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, the memory of Cade's dark, searching eyes lingered at the edge of her dreams, refusing to let her rest in peace. Morning brought a thick fog over the gathering grounds, and with it, a tension that Lyra could not shake no matter how she tried to focus on her tasks. She spent the day continuing her quiet work, gathering information from careful conversations, sending brief coded notes to her contacts among the exiled warriors of her father's old pack. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation beneath the trees, to the strange awareness that had passed between her and Cade like static in the air. Damien noticed her distraction during a strategy meeting with his advisors that afternoon, and afterward, he found her alone near the edge of the encampment, watching the fog slowly lift over the distant hills. "You're troubled," he said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. "I'm fine," Lyra replied, though the words felt hollow, even to her own ears. Damien studied her for a long moment before speaking again, his voice careful. "Whatever is happening between you and Cade Blackwood, I need to understand it. Not because I doubt your loyalty to our arrangement, but because I need to know what risks we're facing." Lyra hesitated, unsure how to explain something she barely understood herself. "There's a pull," she admitted finally, the words feeling strange and dangerous on her tongue. "Something I can't explain. It happened the first time I saw him, months ago, before any of this began. I thought it meant nothing. I still want it to mean nothing." Damien's expression grew serious, a flicker of understanding crossing his features that surprised her. "A pull," he repeated quietly. "Lyra, do you know what that could mean, among our kind?" Lyra's stomach tightened at the gravity in his voice. "I've heard the old stories," she said slowly. "Fated bonds. I always thought they were just legends parents told their children." "They're not," Damien said. "They're rare, but real. If what you're describing is true, it could be the beginning of a fated bond forming between you and Cade. If that bond becomes fully realized, it will be impossible to ignore, no matter how much either of you might wish to." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible," she said, though her voice trembled with something close to fear. "I've spent 8 years planning his downfall. Fate would not be so cruel as to bind me to the very man I intend to destroy." Damien's expression softened slightly, sympathy replacing his earlier caution. "Fate rarely considers what would be convenient," he said quietly. "I'm not saying this to frighten you further. I'm saying it because you need to be prepared, in case the bond continues to grow stronger." Lyra turned away, staring out at the fog-covered hills, her mind racing through the implications of what he had said. A fated bond would mean more than simple attraction. It would mean an undeniable connection recognized by every wolf in every pack. A bond that could not be hidden or denied once fully revealed. If such a bond existed between her and Cade, her carefully constructed plan for revenge could crumble before she ever had the chance to see it through. "What do the old stories say happens," she asked quietly, "if a fated bond is denied?" Damien's expression grew troubled. "The stories vary," he said carefully. "Some claim that denying a true bond brings misfortune upon both wolves, weakening their strength, and clouding their judgment. Others claim it simply causes prolonged suffering, an ache that never fully fades. I don't know which version holds truth, if any of them do. Bonds like this are rare enough that few in this generation have witnessed one firsthand." Lyra pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to steady the storm of emotions rising within her. "I won't accept it," she said firmly. "Whatever pull exists between us, I refuse to let it interfere with what I've promised myself I would do." Damien studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I understand your resolve," he said finally, "but be careful, Lyra. Denying something as powerful as fate rarely comes without cost, and if the bond continues to grow, hiding it will become increasingly difficult, especially among wolves, who can sense these things far more easily than humans might assume." The rest of the day passed in a haze of unease. Lyra attended the remaining council discussions with practiced composure, offering thoughtful contributions when needed, though her mind remained tangled in the weight of what Damien had revealed. She caught herself glancing toward Cade's encampment more than once, and each time, she forced her gaze away, frustrated by her own lack of control. That evening, as the gathering's final formal dinner approached, Lyra dressed carefully, steadying her nerves with slow, measured breaths. She reminded herself of her mother's cold hand, of her father's broken spirit, of every reason she had for standing here in the first place. Whatever fate seemed determined to force upon her, she would not let it erase 8 years of purpose. The dinner hall buzzed with quiet conversation, as pack leaders and their advisors gathered for the final evening of the treaty proceedings. Lyra took her seat beside Damien, doing her best to focus on the discussions around her, rather than the man seated several tables away, whose presence seemed to pull at her attention no matter how hard she resisted it. Throughout the meal, she felt Cade's gaze find hers more than once, brief and searching, as though he too were struggling to understand the strange awareness settling between them. She refused to meet his eyes directly, focusing instead on the conversation at her own table, though her heart continued its unsteady rhythm, regardless of her efforts. As the evening wound down and guests began retiring to their tents, Lyra excused herself early, needing distance from the suffocating tension of the hall. She walked along the edge of the encampment, breathing in the cool night air, trying to quiet the storm building within her. She did not notice Cade following at a careful distance until his voice broke the silence behind her. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. Lyra turned, steeling herself against the strange warmth that spread through her chest at the sight of him standing in the moonlight. "I've been busy," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "That's not what I asked," Cade replied, stepping closer, his expression more open than she had seen it before. "Something is happening. I don't understand it, but I feel it every time you're near. I need to know if you feel it too." Lyra's breath caught in her throat, panic and longing colliding painfully in her chest. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, though her voice wavered just enough to betray her. Cade studied her carefully, and for a moment, something vulnerable flickered behind his usually guarded expression. "I think you do," he said quietly. "I think you feel it as strongly as I do." Lyra took a step back, putting distance between them, before her resolve could crumble entirely. "Whatever you think you feel, Cade Blackwood," she said, her voice trembling with barely restrained emotion. "It changes nothing between us." She turned and walked quickly back toward her tent, leaving him standing alone beneath the moonlight, his expression a mixture of confusion and something that looked dangerously close to longing. Behind her, she heard him call her name softly into the night, but she did not look back, afraid of what she might see in his eyes, and more afraid of what she might feel if she did. The final night of the gathering brought with it an ancient tradition that Lyra had almost forgotten in the chaos of her racing thoughts. Each treaty gathering closed with a moonlit ritual, a ceremony in which the assembled packs shifted together beneath the full moon, to honor unity among their kind, even amid old rivalries. It was meant to be a symbolic gesture, a reminder that beneath their different banners, they all shared the same blood and the same moon. Lyra had attended such rituals before in her youth, back when her family still held a place of honor among the packs, but she had not shifted in the presence of so many strangers in years. The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit, especially given everything Damien had told her about fated bonds and the way they revealed themselves. As dusk fell over the gathering grounds, warriors and leaders from every pack moved toward the wide clearing at the center of the encampment, where the ritual would take place beneath the open sky. Lyra walked beside Damien, her nerves tightly wound, though she did her best to project calm confidence. "Stay close to the edge of the group if you can," Damien murmured quietly as they approached the clearing. "It will make it easier to control your reactions if needed." Lyra nodded, grateful for his steady presence, though nothing could fully calm the anxious hum beneath her skin. She glanced across the clearing and saw Cade standing among his own warriors, his expression unreadable in the fading light, though his eyes found hers almost immediately, as though drawn by some invisible thread neither of them could sever. The moon rose slowly, full and silver, casting a pale glow over the gathered wolves. An elder from the host pack began the ritual with a low, resonant chant, calling upon the old spirits of their ancestors to bless the unity of the packs beneath the sacred moonlight. One by one, warriors began to shift, their forms shimmering and transforming into powerful wolves of every size and color, until the clearing was filled with a sea of fur and glowing eyes. Lyra felt the familiar pull of her own shift building within her, the ritual's ancient magic tugging at something instinctual deep inside her chest. She fought to control the transformation, mindful of Damien's warning, but the pull of the ceremony combined with the overwhelming awareness of Cade's presence nearby proved too powerful to resist. Her body shifted before she could stop it, bones and muscle rearranging themselves in a swift, practiced motion, until she stood among the gathered wolves in her true form, pale gray fur catching the moonlight, her senses sharpening instantly with the heightened awareness of her wolf. Across the clearing, she felt Cade's presence like a physical pull, and to her horror, she realized her wolf had turned instinctively toward him, an ache rising in her chest that she could not suppress. Before she could stop herself, a low, involuntary howl rose from her throat, carrying across the clearing with startling clarity. The moment the sound left her, she felt Cade's entire body go rigid across the clearing, his dark wolf head snapping toward her with unmistakable recognition. And then, before either of them could stop it, his own howl rose to answer hers, the two sounds weaving together in a haunting harmony that silenced every other wolf in the clearing. Gasps rippled through the gathered pack leaders and elders as the two howls intertwined, rising and falling together in perfect, unmistakable synchronization. Lyra's heart pounded with panic as she realized what was happening. The ancient sign recognized by every wolf present. A sign that could not be faked or mistaken. A fated bond had revealed itself beneath the full moon, in front of every pack leader in the northern territories. The elder who had led the ritual stepped forward, his aged eyes wide with astonishment, as he looked between Lyra and Cade, both still in their wolf forms, both frozen in stunned recognition of what had just occurred. "The howls have synced," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent clearing. "A fated bond has revealed itself among us tonight." Whispers erupted through the crowd, shock and disbelief rippling from pack to pack, as leaders turned to stare at Lyra and Cade, with expressions ranging from astonishment to calculation. Lyra felt panic claw at her chest as she quickly shifted back into her human form, wrapping herself in the cloak she had left nearby, her mind racing through the catastrophic implications of what had just happened. Across the clearing, Cade shifted back as well, his expression a mixture of shock and something else. Something raw and unguarded that Lyra had never seen on his face before. He stared at her, as though seeing her for the very first time, his dark eyes wide, with a realization that seemed to shake the very foundation of his composure. "It's you," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the murmuring crowd, though Lyra heard every word as though he had shouted it directly into her ear. "You're my fated mate." Lyra's heart pounded painfully in her chest. Horror, and something dangerously close to longing, warring within her all at once. The man she had sworn to destroy, the man responsible for her family's ruin and her mother's death, was bound to her by the oldest and most sacred connection her kind recognized. Fate, it seemed, had chosen the cruelest possible twist for her carefully planned revenge. Damien appeared at her side instantly, his expression carefully controlled despite the storm she could sense simmering beneath his calm exterior. "We need to leave," he said quietly, his hand resting protectively near her shoulder without quite touching her. "Now." Lyra nodded numbly, allowing him to guide her away from the clearing as murmurs and whispers followed them into the darkness. Behind her, she could still feel Cade's stare burning into her back, and though she refused to look behind her, she could not shake the overwhelming certainty that nothing between them would ever be simple again. As they reached the privacy of their tent, Damien released a slow breath, running a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking under the weight of what had just happened. "This complicates everything," he said quietly. "I know," Lyra whispered, sinking onto the edge of a wooden chair, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to control them. "I never wanted this. I never asked for this." "I believe you," Damien said, his voice gentler than she expected. "But belief doesn't change what every pack leader in that clearing just witnessed. By morning, the news will have spread across every territory in the north. There's no hiding from a bond that's already been revealed." Lyra pressed her palms against her eyes, exhaustion and fear settling heavily over her. "What do I do now?" she asked quietly, more to herself than to him. Damien was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But whatever comes next, you won't face it alone. Whatever else is true between us, that much I promise you." Lyra looked up at him, grateful beyond words for his steady presence amid the chaos unraveling around her, though even his reassurance could not fully quiet the storm of fear and confusion twisting inside her chest. Somewhere beyond the walls of their tent, Cade Blackwood was likely wrestling with the same impossible truth she now faced. Fate had bound them together, and nothing, not her carefully built plan for revenge, not the marriage she had entered for strategy rather than love, would ever be simple again. News of the revealed bond spread through the gathering grounds faster than Lyra could have imagined possible. By the time the sun rose over the encampment, whispers had turned into open discussion, and pack leaders who had barely acknowledged her presence before now watched her with open curiosity as she moved through the camp, preparing for the journey home. Damien remained close by her side throughout the morning, his presence a steady anchor amid the storm of attention she now found impossible to escape. Yet she could sense a quiet tension building within him as well, something he had not yet given voice to, though she suspected it would not remain unspoken for much longer. They rode in silence for much of the journey back to Damien's territory, the weight of everything unsaid pressing heavily between them. It was not until they stopped to rest the horses near a quiet stream that Damien finally broke the silence. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice measured but firm. "And I need you to answer honestly." Lyra turned to face him, bracing herself for the question she somehow already knew was coming. "Ask," she said quietly. "Did you know," Damien said slowly, "when you first approached me with your proposal, that a fated bond with Cade Blackwood might exist?" "No," Lyra said immediately, the honesty in her voice unmistakable. "I felt something the first time I saw him, months before I ever spoke to you. I told myself it meant nothing. I had no way of knowing it was anything more than unease, or perhaps hatred wearing an unfamiliar disguise. I swear to you, Damien, I never intended to deceive you about this." Damien studied her carefully, searching her expression for any hint of dishonesty, before finally nodding, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "I believe you," he said, "though I won't pretend this doesn't complicate our arrangement significantly." Lyra lowered her gaze, guilt twisting uncomfortably in her chest despite the honesty of her answer. "I understand. If this changes things between us," she said quietly. "You didn't sign on for this." Damien was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the flowing stream, before speaking again. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight she had not heard from him before. "Something I should have told you before we married, though the timing never felt right." Lyra looked up at him, curiosity and concern mingling in her expression. "What is it?" Damien took a slow breath before continuing. "My reasons for agreeing to marry you were not purely strategic, as I let you believe," he said. "Years ago, before I built this pack from nothing, my family held a position of respect not unlike your own. Cade Blackwood's father formed an alliance with my family as well, one he broke just as thoroughly as he broke yours, though the details of my family's fall are different from what happened to you." Lyra's eyes widened with surprise as she absorbed his words. "You never told me this," she said. "I wasn't ready to," Damien admitted. "I've spent years building this pack in quiet defiance of the Blackwood name, gathering strength and resources with the intention of eventually challenging their hold over the Northern Territories. When you approached me with your proposal, I recognized an opportunity. Someone who understood the weight of loss at Cade Blackwood's hands, someone sharp enough to help me plan carefully, rather than act recklessly. I agreed to marry you not only for political convenience, but because I believed we shared a common purpose." Lyra absorbed this revelation slowly, pieces of the puzzle shifting into place within her mind. "So you've been planning against Cade as well," she said, "all this time?" "Quietly," Damien confirmed. "Far more quietly than your approach, admittedly. I've focused on building strength rather than seeking direct revenge. But yes, I've hoped for an opportunity to weaken his hold over the northern packs for years." Lyra studied him with newfound understanding, the careful, guarded man she had married revealing layers she had not expected to find. "Then perhaps our arrangement makes even more sense than either of us realized at the start," she said quietly. "Perhaps," Damien agreed, though his expression grew troubled once more. "But the fated bond changes things, Lyra. I won't pretend otherwise. A bond like that cannot simply be ignored, no matter how inconvenient its timing. If you deny it, the toll it takes on you will only grow heavier with time. I've seen it happen before, in an older warrior within my own pack who denied his fated bond decades ago. It hollowed him out slowly, until very little of who he once was remained." Lyra's stomach twisted uncomfortably at the warning in his words. "What are you suggesting?" she asked carefully. "I'm not suggesting anything," Damien said honestly. "I'm simply telling you the truth, so you can make an informed choice about how to move forward. Whatever you decide regarding Cade Blackwood, know that I won't stand in your way, and I won't hold you to obligations you can no longer fulfill in good conscience. Our marriage was built on mutual benefit, not possession. If circumstances have changed, we can adjust our arrangement accordingly. Lyra felt a rush of gratitude toward him, admiration for his fairness, deepening the respect she already held for the man she had married, for reasons far removed from affection. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your honesty, and for your patience." Damien offered her a small, genuine smile, the first she had seen from him in days. "We're partners in this, Lyra," he said. "Whatever shape that partnership needs to take moving forward, we'll figure it out together." As they resumed their journey toward home, Lyra's mind remained heavy with the weight of everything she had learned, both about Damien's hidden history and about the impossible bond fate had forced upon her. She still did not know what she intended to do about Cade Blackwood, the man she had sworn to destroy, the man now bound to her by forces older and more powerful than her own carefully constructed plans. But for the first time since the moonlit ritual had revealed their bond, she allowed herself to consider a question she had refused to face before. What if fate was not simply a cruel obstacle standing between her and her revenge, but something else entirely, something she had not yet allowed herself to understand? She did not have an answer, not yet. But somewhere deep within her, beneath the years of carefully nurtured anger, a small and unfamiliar hope had begun to stir, whether she wanted it to or not. 10 days after the gathering, a messenger arrived at Damien's territory, bearing the unmistakable black and silver seal of the Blackwood pack. Lyra's hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax and unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the carefully written words within. Cade requested a private meeting, not as pack leaders, not as rivals, as two people bound by a truth neither of them had asked for. She sat with the letter for a long time before bringing it to Damien, who read it in silence, his expression carefully neutral. "You should go," he said finally. "Ignoring this will only make things more difficult, both for you and for the stability of the Northern Territories. Whispers are already spreading. Better to face this directly than to let uncertainty fester." "You're not concerned about what might happen?" Lyra asked, watching him carefully. "I trust you," Damien said simply. "And I trust that whatever happens between you and Cade, you'll make the choice that feels right, not the choice that feels easiest." Lyra left for the meeting 3 days later, traveling with a small escort to a neutral location, along the border between Damien's territory and Cade's kingdom, an old stone outpost that had once served as a checkpoint between their father's lands, long before either pack existed in its current form. Cade was already waiting when she arrived, standing alone near the crumbling stone wall, his warriors kept at a respectful distance. He looked different than she remembered from the gathering, less guarded, the weight of the past days visibly etched into his expression. "Thank you for coming," he said, as she approached, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "I wasn't sure I would," Lyra admitted honestly. Cade studied her for a long moment, before gesturing toward a low stone bench nearby. "Will you sit with me? There's a great deal I need to say, and I'd rather not shout it across an open field." Lyra hesitated only briefly, before joining him, keeping a careful distance between them despite the strange pull she still felt whenever he was near. "Say what you need to say," she said. Cade took a slow breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've spent the last 10 days trying to understand what happened at the gathering," he began. "Fated bonds are rare enough that I never expected to experience one myself. I won't pretend I fully understand what it means yet. But I know I can't ignore it, and I don't want to." Lyra's chest tightened at his words, old anger and unfamiliar longing colliding painfully within her. "Before we speak about the bond," she said carefully, "there's something I need to ask you. Something that has weighed on me for 8 years. Cade turned to face her fully, his expression attentive. "Ask me anything," he said. Lyra took a steadying breath before speaking, years of buried grief finally finding their voice. 8 years ago, your father died, and you rose to power. My father had formed an alliance with your family, trusting your father's word that our packs would stand together. When you took control, you broke that alliance. You seized our lands, scattered our warriors, and exiled my father, branding him a traitor for daring to question you. My mother died that winter, from grief and cold, in a cabin far from everything she had ever known. I want to know why. I deserve to know why." Cade's face had gone pale as she spoke, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as her words settled over him. "What was your father's name?" he asked quietly, his voice tight with sudden urgency. "Aldrich Ashford," Lyra said, watching him carefully. Cade closed his eyes briefly, a visible tremor passing through him. "Lyra," he said slowly, opening his eyes to meet hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I need you to understand something. I did not exile your father. I did not break that alliance. When my father died, I was barely 18, thrust into leadership before I was ready for it, surrounded by advisors I trusted far more than I should have. One advisor in particular, a man named Edric Voss, convinced me that several allied pacts, including your father's, posed a threat to the stability of my rule. I was young, grieving, and desperate to prove my strength. I signed documents I did not fully understand, trusting Voss's counsel over my own judgment. It was not until years later that I discovered how thoroughly he had manipulated the early decisions of my reign, positioning himself to benefit from alliances he encouraged me to destroy." Lyra stared at him, shock and confusion warring within her. "Edric Voss," she repeated slowly, the name stirring a distant memory she could not quite place. "Your father's advisor. He served my father for over a decade before I inherited his counsel," Cade said, his voice heavy with old regret. "I dismissed him from his position 3 years ago, once I finally understood the extent of his manipulation, though by then, the damage to several pacts, including yours it seems, had already been done. I've spent years trying to right some of those wrongs quietly, offering support to displaced families, where I could, without drawing public attention to my father's original mistakes. I never knew your family's name among them. I'm so sorry, Lyra. If I had known, I would have found you years ago." Lyra's mind reeled, the foundation of 8 years of carefully cultivated hatred, trembling beneath the weight of this unexpected revelation. "Where is Voss now?" she asked, her voice tight with a fresh, complicated anger that no longer had a clear target. Cade's expression darkened. "That's the troubling part," he said. "After his dismissal, he disappeared from my territory entirely. I've heard rumors over the past year that he's been quietly rebuilding influence somewhere in the northern regions, though I've never been able to confirm his exact location or intentions." Lyra sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile everything she had believed for 8 years with the complicated truth now unfolding before her. The man she had sworn to destroy had not been the true architect of her family's ruin, only its unwitting instrument, manipulated by someone far more calculating than either of them had realized. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "I built my entire life around a promise to destroy you. If that promise was misplaced, I don't know who I am without it." Cade reached out slowly, his hand hovering near hers without quite touching, giving her the choice of whether to close the distance. "You don't have to know right now," he said gently. "But whatever you decide about us, about the bond fate has placed between us, I want you to know the truth. Whoever truly destroyed your family, whoever manipulated my early reign into decisions I never should have made, deserves to face consequences far more than I do. And I intend to find him, with or without your help." Lyra looked down at his outstretched hand, the weight of 8 years of anger colliding with a truth that reshaped everything she thought she understood. Slowly, hesitantly, she allowed her fingers to rest against his, and the warmth that spread through her at the simple contact confirmed everything the ritual Howl had already revealed. Fate had not made a mistake, but the true enemy, it seemed, was still out there, hiding somewhere in the shadows of the northern territories, waiting to be found. Lyra returned to Damien's territory, carrying the weight of everything she had learned, her mind still struggling to reconcile 8 years of certainty with the complicated truth Cade had revealed. She found Damien waiting in his study, and she recounted the conversation carefully, watching his expression shift from surprise to deep concern as she spoke Edric Voss's name. "I know that name," Damien said slowly, rising from his chair and pacing toward the window. "Not well, but I've heard it mentioned among my advisors, always in passing, always tied to rumors of a shadowy figure gathering loyalty among displaced warriors in the eastern hills." Lyra's heart quickened at the confirmation. Cade said Voss disappeared after his dismissal 3 years ago, she said. If he's been rebuilding influence in secret, gathering displaced warriors who share genuine grievances against Cade's early rule, he could be assembling a force capable of real danger. Damien's expression grew grim. Displaced warriors like the ones from your father's old pack, he said quietly. Warriors who might be susceptible to a leader, promising them justice against the Blackwood name, unaware that the true architect of their suffering is the one offering to lead them. The realization settled heavily over the room. If Voss had spent years quietly recruiting embittered warriors from packs destroyed under his manipulation, including possibly remnants of Lyra's own father's scattered followers, he could be building towards something far more dangerous than simple political influence. We need to find him, Lyra said firmly, before he uses the very people he wronged as weapons against Cade, or against anyone else who stands in his way. Damien nodded, already moving toward his desk to gather maps of the Eastern Territories. I'll send word to my most trusted scouts, he said, quietly. If Voss has spent years building this network in secret, we can't risk alerting him that we're searching. He'll have contingencies in place, likely including plans to disappear entirely if he senses discovery. Over the following days, Lyra worked alongside Damien's advisors, cross-referencing years of scattered reports and rumors, slowly piecing together a picture of Voss's movements since his dismissal from Cade's court. A pattern began to emerge. Small pockets of unrest in the eastern hills, quiet gatherings of displaced warriors, whispers of a charismatic leader promising to restore what had been stolen from proud but broken packs. Cade arrived at Damien's territory a week later, having received word through his own network of scouts that pointed toward similar conclusions. The three of them met in Damien's study, an unlikely alliance formed from rivalry, marriage, and fate, now united by a common threat that endangered all of their interests. My scouts have located a settlement in the eastern hills that matches the pattern we've been tracking, Cade said, spreading a map across the table. It's well hidden, protected by difficult terrain, but not impossible to reach. If Voss is there, and if he's truly building an army from displaced warriors, we need to act carefully. A direct assault could turn genuinely wronged people into casualties of a conflict they didn't choose. Agreed, Damien said, studying the map carefully. These warriors aren't our enemies. Voss is. If we can separate his influence from the people he's manipulated, we may be able to resolve this without unnecessary conflict. Lyra studied the map, her mind working through the possibilities. What if I approach them directly? She said slowly. As the daughter of a pack Voss helped destroy, if some of these warriors are remnants of my father's old followers, they might recognize me, or at least be willing to listen before assuming I stand with Cade against them. Cade's expression tightened with concern. That would be dangerous, he said. If Voss discovers your identity before you have the chance to speak with them directly, he could use you as a hostage, or worse. I understand the risk, Lyra said firmly. But I also understand these people, in a way neither of you fully can. I know what it feels like to lose everything, and to search desperately for someone to blame. If there's a chance I can reach them before more damage is done, I have to try. A tense silence settled over the room, as Cade and Damien exchanged a long, weighted look, both clearly reluctant to allow her into danger, yet both recognizing the value of her offer. If you do this, Cade said finally, his voice tight with barely restrained concern, you won't do it alone. I'll accompany you, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to avoid immediate suspicion. As will I, Damien added. Whatever else stands between us, your safety matters to both of us. We'll face this together. Lyra looked between the two men, an unexpected wave of gratitude washing over her, at their united determination to protect her, despite the tangled complexity of their shared history. Then we plan carefully, she said. And we move soon, before Voss has the chance to grow any stronger. As the meeting continued late into the evening, maps and strategies spread across the table, Lyra found herself steadying into a new kind of resolve, one built not on blind vengeance, but on a clearer, more complicated understanding of justice. The path ahead remained uncertain and dangerous, but for the first time in 8 years, she felt something closer to purpose than to grief guiding her forward. Whatever awaited them in the eastern hills, she would face it with allies she had never expected to find, bound together by fate, by shared history, and by a truth finally beginning to see the light, after years buried in shadow. The journey into the eastern hills took 3 days, the terrain growing rougher and more forested with each passing mile. Lyra rode between Cade and Damien, an uneasy but united trio, their small group of trusted warriors following at a discreet distance, to avoid drawing attention. The plan was simple in theory, and dangerous in practice. Lyra would approach the hidden settlement alone, presenting herself as a displaced daughter, seeking answers about her father's old pack, while Cade and Damien remained close enough to intervene if the situation turned dangerous. As they neared the settlement, hidden deep within a narrow valley surrounded by steep forested slopes, Lyra felt her nerves tighten with each step. She had rehearsed what she would say 100 times during the journey, yet nothing could fully prepare her for the reality of what waited ahead. The settlement itself was modest but well organized. Simple wooden structures arranged around a central gathering area, warriors moving purposefully between tasks, with the discipline of people who had rebuilt their lives from ruin. Lyra approached slowly, her hands visible and non-threatening, aware of watchful eyes tracking her movement from the moment she entered the valley. A young warrior intercepted her before she reached the central gathering area, his expression wary but not immediately hostile. "State your business," he said firmly. "My name is Lyra Ashford," she said clearly, watching his expression carefully for any reaction. "My father was Aldrich Ashford. I'm searching for anyone who might have known him, or who remembers our pack before it was scattered." The young warrior's eyes widened slightly at the name, recognition flickering across his features. "Wait here," he said, before hurrying toward the largest structure at the center of the settlement. Moments later, an older woman emerged, her weathered face creasing with disbelief, as she studied Lyra closely. "Aldrich's daughter," she said softly, stepping closer. "I served under your father, many years ago. I never thought I would see his face again in his child." Relief and grief mingled painfully in Lyra's chest at the woman's words. "I've come because I need to understand what's happening here," she said carefully. "I've learned troubling things about the man who may be leading this settlement, things I believe you deserve to know." The woman's expression grew guarded. "You mean Voss," she said quietly. "Yes," Lyra confirmed. "Please, I need you to hear me out. I believe he's the one responsible for what happened to our pack, not the man many of you may believe destroyed us." A crowd began to gather as their conversation continued, warriors and families drawn by curiosity and the mention of Voss's name. Lyra felt the weight of dozens of watchful eyes as she carefully explained everything she had learned. Cade's confession about Voss's manipulation during his early reign, the deliberate destruction of alliances for personal gain, the careful positioning that had allowed Voss to profit from the very chaos he orchestrated. Murmurs of disbelief and anger rippled through the gathered crowd, some faces hardening with denial, others softening with dawning understanding, as pieces of their own scattered memories began aligning with Lyra's account. "This is a lie!" A sharp voice cut through the crowd suddenly. Lyra turned to see a tall, thin man emerging from the largest structure, his expression cold and calculating, despite the carefully neutral tone of his voice. Something about his bearing, the practiced authority in his stance, told her immediately that she was looking at Edric Voss himself. "You've come to poison the loyalty I've spent years rebuilding," Voss said, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. Aldrich's daughter, working alongside Cade Blackwood, spreading his lies to protect his own guilt. "I'm not working for Cade," Lyra said firmly, though her heart pounded with the danger of the moment. "I'm here because I learned the truth, and these people deserve to know it too. You manipulated a grieving young leader into destroying alliances for your own benefit. You are the reason my mother died. You are the reason these people lost everything." Voss's composed expression cracked slightly, anger flashing behind his eyes before he smoothed it away. "Careful, girl," he said quietly. "Accusations without proof are dangerous things to voice among people desperate for someone to blame." "Then let her speak," the older woman who had first recognized Lyra said firmly, stepping forward with unexpected authority. "We've followed you for years, Voss, believing you shared our grief and our desire for justice. If there's truth to what she says, we deserve to hear it fully, before choosing our loyalty any further." Voss's eyes darted around the gathering crowd, calculating his options as murmurs of uncertainty spread among the warriors who had once trusted him without question. Sensing the shifting tide, He took a step back, his composed mask finally slipping entirely. "You would believe the word of a stranger over years of loyalty," he snarled, "over everything I've built to give you purpose and strength again." "We would believe the truth," the older woman replied steadily, "wherever it leads us." In that moment of hesitation, Voss's eyes flickered toward the tree line beyond the settlement, and Lyra recognized the look of a man calculating an escape. Before she could react, he turned and bolted toward the forest, moving with surprising speed despite his advancing age. Shouts erupted through the settlement as warriors moved to pursue him, but it was Cade who emerged from the tree line first, having positioned himself exactly where such an escape attempt might lead, intercepting Voss before he could vanish into the surrounding wilderness. Damien arrived moments later, and together they restrained the struggling man, dragging him back toward the gathered crowd, who watched with a mixture of shock and vindication. "Edric Voss," Cade said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent settlement, "you are hereby held accountable for the manipulation of alliances during the early years of my reign, and for the deliberate destruction of innocent packs for personal gain. You will face judgment before the full council of Northern leaders, where the truth of your actions will be heard by all who suffered because of them." The crowd erupted into a mixture of stunned silence and quiet, cathartic weeping, years of misplaced grief and anger, finally finding their true target. Lyra stood at the center of it all, watching as the foundation of 8 years of misguided vengeance crumbled away, replaced by something that felt, for the first time, like genuine justice. As warriors moved to secure Voss for the journey back to face formal judgment, Lyra felt Cade's hand find hers, steady and warm, and she did not pull away. Whatever remained uncertain about the future, this much felt undeniably clear. The truth had finally been brought into the light, and the long shadow of her family's destruction had finally begun to lift. The council gathering to judge Edric Voss took place 3 weeks later, drawing leaders from every pack across the Northern Territories to witness the formal proceedings. Lyra stood at the front of the assembled crowd alongside Cade and Damien, watching as years of hidden manipulation were finally laid bare before witnesses who had waited far too long for answers. Voss offered no genuine remorse during the proceedings, his cold composure returning as he faced the council, though the evidence against him proved overwhelming. Testimonies from displaced warriors, careful records uncovered from his years of secret dealings, and Cade's own detailed account of the manipulation he had endured as a grieving young leader, combined to form an undeniable picture of guilt. The council's judgment was swift and final, stripping Voss of any remaining influence and exiling him permanently from the Northern Territories, forbidden from ever again holding a position of trust among any pack. As the proceedings concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Lyra felt a strange lightness settle over her, the weight of 8 years finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. She had entered this journey seeking revenge against a man who, she now understood, had also been a victim of circumstances beyond his control. What she found instead was truth, justice, and something she never expected to discover along the way. That evening, as the Northern leaders gathered for a final, informal dinner to mark the resolution of the crisis, Lyra found herself standing beside both Cade and Damien, near the edge of the gathering, the three of them sharing a quiet moment away from the noise of celebration. "I owe you both an apology," Lyra said quietly, looking between the two men who had become unexpected pillars of support throughout her journey. "I built a plan around deception and revenge, and both of you extended trust and protection I never fully deserved." Damien shook his head gently. "You deserved answers," he said, "and you found the truth, not just for yourself, but for dozens of families who had been living under the same misplaced grief for years. That's not something to apologize for." Cade nodded in agreement, his expression soft as he studied her. "Damien is right," he said. "Whatever began as deception led us all towards something far more important. I'm grateful it did, even knowing the cost it carried along the way." An awkward, but not unkind silence settled between the three of them, the complicated nature of their shared history hanging delicately in the air. Finally, Damien spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Lyra," he said carefully, "I think it's time we discuss what comes next, honestly, between the three of us." Lyra nodded, bracing herself for the conversation she had known was coming since the night of the moonlit ritual. "I agree," she said. "Our marriage was built on strategy, Damien continued. Not on the kind of bond you share with Cade. I've come to respect you deeply over these past months, Lyra, and I don't regret a moment of our arrangement. But I won't stand between you and a fated bond, especially not one that has already proven itself capable of guiding us all toward truth and justice. You've been a true partner to me, Lyra said, her voice thick with genuine gratitude. I won't forget that, regardless of what happens next. Damien offered her a small, genuine smile. Nor will I forget the woman who walked into my hall with nothing but a plan and a broken heart, and left it as someone far stronger and far more at peace. He turned to Cade, extending his hand in a gesture of respect. Take care of her, he said simply. Cade shook his hand firmly, the two former rivals finding an unexpected mutual respect forged through the trials they had faced together. I intend to, Cade said quietly. As Damien stepped away to rejoin the larger gathering, giving them a private moment beneath the evening sky, Cade turned to face Lyra fully, his expression open and unguarded, in a way she had never seen before their journey began. I know this hasn't been a simple path for either of us, he said softly, but I meant what I said the night the bond revealed itself. Whatever fate has decided for us, I choose it too, not out of obligation, but because somewhere along this journey, I found myself caring for you in ways I never expected. Lyra felt tears gather in her eyes, years of grief and anger, finally giving way to something gentler, something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time. I spent 8 years building my life around a promise to destroy you, she admitted quietly. I never imagined it would lead me here instead, standing beside you, choosing you freely. Then choose freely, Cade said gently, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch tender and searching. Not because fate demands it, but because you want to. Lyra closed the remaining distance between them, resting her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. I choose you, she said softly, the words carrying the weight of everything she had lost, and everything she had finally found. Not as the enemy I once believed you to be, but as the man who helped me find the truth, and helped me find peace. Cade's arms wrapped gently around her, and for the first time since her mother's cold hand had slipped from hers so many years ago, Lyra felt something settle fully into place within her heart, a wound finally beginning to heal, rather than fester. In the months that followed, Lyra worked alongside Cade to rebuild what had been broken during the years of Voss's hidden manipulation, offering support and restitution to displaced families across the Northern Territories, including many of her father's old followers who had finally found their way home. Her father, still living quietly in exile, was invited to return with honor restored, and though the years of loss could never be fully erased, a measure of peace finally settled over what remained of the Ashford name. Damien remained a trusted ally and friend, his own pack continuing to grow in strength and respect, no longer defined by rivalry with the Blackwood name, but by mutual cooperation, forged through shared hardship and honest partnership. And Lyra, once a woman consumed entirely by grief and vengeance, found herself standing at the side of the very man she had once sworn to destroy, not as an instrument of revenge, but as an equal, a partner, and finally, a woman who had reclaimed her own heart on her own terms, guided at last not by anger, but by truth, courage, and an unexpected, undeniable bond that fate had chosen with far more wisdom than she ever gave it credit for.